I was standing barefoot in my living room, ankle-deep in dirty water, holding a broken family photo frame in one hand and a soaked HOA violation notice in the other. Outside, lawn chairs floated across my perfectly trimmed yard like lazy river rafts, and right there, on the sidewalk, stood her, clipboard in hand, pastel visor, smug smile, HOA Karen herself, watching, smirking, not even pretending to be surprised. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random pipe burst or freak storm. This was a hit job. And my home? It was ground zero. Should have followed the rules, she said, like a cartoon villain in a country club. Then she turned and walked away, sandals slapping through, puddles like applause for her own sabotage. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat on the kitchen counter, surrounded by soaked drywall and floating cereal boxes, replaying every conversation I'd had with the HOA over the past 3 months, every threat, every fine, every fake smile. And I knew this wasn't just personal anymore. This was war. See, when I moved into this luxury community, I thought I was buying peace, privacy, maybe a place to breathe. What I got was a neighborhood dictatorship run by a board of pastel tyrants who thought they owned the sky, the grass, and apparently now, my plumbing. And I knew exactly why they wanted me gone. It wasn't just the minor rule disagreements. It wasn't the fact that I dared to repaint my front door one shade off from approved beige. It was because I pushed back. I asked questions. I showed up at meetings. And most unforgivably, I beat their little citation scheme in court. Once. That day, I became a problem. Right then, I became a target. Still flooding my house? That was a whole new level of HOA psychopathy. But here's what they didn't know. What Karen and her clipboard army never thought to ask was what I did for a living before I moved here. I wasn't just some stubborn homeowner with a grudge. I was a civil engineer, one who spent over a decade designing flood mitigation systems for high-end developments. The kind of guy you hire to make sure this exact kind of disaster never happens. So when I saw the waterline on my walls, when I followed the puddles back to a suspiciously redirected runoff pipe behind my hedges, when I realized my home had been intentionally flooded using HOA-controlled infrastructure, I didn't panic. I started planning. Because here's the thing about water. It doesn't just destroy. If you know how to use it, contain it, and reroute it, it can reveal things like negligence, corruption, hidden flaws, and if you're really clever, it can expose people, or better yet, sink them. So while Karen was probably sipping her cucumber water and patting herself on the back for driving out one more non-compliant homeowner, I was quietly documenting everything. I started with photos, measurements, then I pulled blueprints. That's when I found it, the crack in their armor, a critical flaw in the community's underground drainage grid, one that, if slightly overloaded in just the right way, would do exactly what they did to me, but to everyone, and no one would be able to blame me, because they built it wrong. So I smiled. They had declared war. They just didn't know they were fighting someone who designs battlefields for a living. Let me rewind a bit, because trust me, the flood was just the finale of a very long, very stupid war, one that started with a mailbox. Yeah, a mailbox. It was exactly a quarter-inch too tall. That's what triggered my first violation notice. Not a warning, not a conversation, just a $75 fine and a passive-aggressive note about visual inconsistency. I figured it was a mistake. I even laughed. I didn't know I had just stepped into the HOA version of the Hunger Games. Now, before you ask, no, I'm not the problem neighbor. I mow my lawn. I power wash my driveway. I don't throw parties. I even installed solar panels to help the grid. But apparently I committed the ultimate HOA sin. I didn't fear them. And in this neighborhood, that's enough. If you've ever dealt with a power-tripping HOA, you know exactly the type. Karen, the self-appointed president, ran the board. Like a suburban cult, she wore that pastel visor like a crown and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Every week, it was something new. My trash bins were visible from the street. My car was parked at an angle that disrupted aesthetic flow. Once, I got a citation for having excessive foliage. You know what that means? My tree had too many leaves, but I didn't roll over. I started attending board meetings. I asked to see the budget. I questioned why neighborhood dues had gone up 17% in 2 years, even though nothing improved. The pool was closed half the time, and the tennis courts had cracked concrete. That's when I became the enemy. 1 month later, I was hit with 5 citations in 1 week. A neighbor, who I later found out was Karen's cousin, reported me for aggressive behavior because I looked at him weird while walking my dog. And then came the big one. A threat of liens and foreclosure if I didn't correct my attitude. You heard that right. Not my lawn, not my paint color, my attitude. And yeah, I fought back. I appealed the citations, filed a complaint with the city, and even won a small claims case over one of the fines. That's when things got weird. My sprinkler system started malfunctioning. My mailbox was ripped out overnight. Cameras caught nothing. The HOA said it was probably teenagers. Then, 2 weeks before the flood, my driveway was suddenly scheduled for emergency maintenance, despite no notice, no request, and no damage. That maintenance crew? They accidentally cut into my main water line and left it exposed. Coincidence? Sure. And I'm the Easter Bunny. Then came the flood, and in the middle of it all, Karen, standing dry on the sidewalk, smiling like she just won a game I didn't. No, I was playing. But here's the part that still gets me. No one in the neighborhood said a word. Not one person came forward. Not one neighbor asked if I was okay. I was the pariah now, the guy who challenged the queen and lost. It wasn't personal anymore. They were all complicit. And that's when I decided, if they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. They wanted me gone? Fine. But I wasn't leaving quietly. I was going to show them who they were messing with. And I wasn't just taking on Karen, I was going to bring down the entire HOA. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I want to know if this kind of HOA madness happens where you live too. Because trust me, it's about to get a whole lot worse. 2 days after the flood, I finally got back into my crawl space, and that's when everything clicked. I found the pipe, a severed, freshly cut PVC connection. Not cracked, not burst, cut, clean, intentional, and right next to it, a half-crushed maintenance tag dated 4 days before the flood, stamped with a signature I instantly recognized, one of Karen's little HOA enforcers, the same guy who once fined me for leaving my garage door open too long. I wasn't dealing with a random disaster. I was standing over the smoking gun. No wonder they'd been so aggressive. No wonder Karen stood outside my house smiling like a Disney villain. This flood wasn't an accident. It was an eviction attempt. A wet, weaponized message. You don't belong here. And most people? They'd probably move, cut their losses, sell low, escape. But I'm not most people. See, what they'd forgotten, or maybe never bothered to learn, is that before I moved into this neighborhood, I spent over a decade designing large-scale commercial drainage systems, hospitals, stadiums, even some high-end luxury resorts. My specialty? Identifying vulnerabilities before they became lawsuits. And standing in that crawl space, soaked to the bone and seething, I realized something chilling. This wasn't the first time this had happened, because my house wasn't even at the lowest point in the neighborhood. There were at least 6 properties sitting at lower elevations, and if my home got hit this bad, what would happen if they got flooded? So I started digging, literally. I traced the entire drainage system from my property all the way to the HOA-run retention basin behind the tennis courts, and what I found was a Frankenstein network of DIY fixes, mismatched PVC lines, and, most dangerously, a totally illegal runoff redirection that sent overflow water straight toward residential lots. Everyone thought that little manicured hill behind the clubhouse was decorative. Nope, it was a ticking time bomb. One heavy storm, or one strategic surge, and half the neighborhood would turn into a swamp. And Karen, she'd signed off on it. I found the permits, or more accurately, the lack of them. The HOA had bypassed city approval and used community dues to hire an unlicensed contractor. The work was done fast, cheap, and completely off the books. No inspections, no oversight, just buried pipes and buried secrets. And now, I had photos, coordinates, flow maps. I even ran a hydro test using a small drone and timed irrigation. The Results were terrifying. If the retention basin overflowed by even 10%, water would backflow right into the homes of every single HOA board member. I laughed, not because this was funny, but because it was poetic. They tried to flood me out, and in doing so, they handed me the blueprint to destroy them. And the best part? No one else knew. The city didn't know. The neighbors didn't know. The HOA thought they had buried their crime beneath mulch and landscaping. But I had the evidence. Now, all I needed was a plan. And that's when I realized I didn't just want revenge. I wanted justice, and I wanted it public, because if I played this right, I wouldn't just take down Karen. I'd take down the entire HOA, expose their corruption, and make sure no one else ever got steamrolled by their smug little empire again. But first I needed to bait the trap. The first rule of war: don't attack your enemy where they're strong. Attack them where they feel invincible. And in this neighborhood, the HOA felt untouchable. They weren't just bullies with clipboards. They had the illusion of legitimacy. Rules, fines, legalese. They'd built a fortress out of bureaucracy and hid behind community standards. But like any fortress, if you know the foundation is rotten, all you need is the right pressure point. And I had it, so I started quietly. First, I documented everything. I created a digital folder with time-stamped photos, pressure readings, and GPS-tagged video footage of the illegal drainage system. I cross-referenced it with archived city maps and satellite images that showed the original design before the HOA's renovations. Then I ran simulations using CAD software to model overflow scenarios. The result? If I triggered just one of the high-elevation sprinkler zones during a scheduled irrigation cycle and timed it with a retention basin release, the entire lower quadrant of the neighborhood would flood in under 40 minutes. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Not yet. First, I needed to make sure the fallout would hit where it counted. The board, so I pulled property records. Guess who lived in that lower quadrant? Karen, her vice president, the treasurer, and her cousin, the same guy who accidentally disconnected my water line. It was like the HOA built their own doomsday device and put all their leadership right in the blast zone. Still, I wasn't interested in just watching water pour into their garages. No, this had to be bigger, public, documented, and most importantly, undeniable. So I baited them. I sent an anonymous email to the HOA's official inbox containing a concerned resident tip. It warned of a potential leak near the retention basin and asked for an emergency inspection. No reply. I sent it again. Still nothing. Then I left a voicemail. Same tip, different fake name. They ignored it. Perfect. Now I had proof that they were negligent even when warned. That's the kind of thing insurance companies and lawyers love to hear, especially when it leads to property damage that could have been prevented. But I still needed one more thing, a distraction, something that would guarantee every